So, as you can see, my presentation today is on injury prevention of the lower extremity for competitive Taekwondo fighters. All right. So today we'll be talking about just some basic anatomy of the legs. You got bones, joints, muscles. Then I have an article discussing the most common injuries suffered by Taekwondo athletes by location and diagnosis. And then I'm going to talk about some muscle imbalances and balances in general in the competitive Taekwondo fighter, and then some areas of focus for your training. Okay. So first off, here are the bones of the lower extremity. You got the pelvis in here. You can also see it over there. You got the femur coming down right here at breaking off the pelvis. You have the kneecap with patella, and the tibia, fibula, and then the bones of the ankle and the foot. Over here, you have the hip joint, otherwise known as the coxifemoral joint. This is the pelvis right here, and the femur, and then all these little rope-looking structures are the tendon or the ligaments of the joint that hold it together. Okay. Over here, you have the knee joint on the left, on the right, the ankle joint. Again, all the structures of the knee here, some muscles like the quadriceps come up top. You got the tendons breaking out into the patella and then coming down connecting to the tibia. I'll go into a little more detail. But in general, this is the knee joint, and all these ligaments, again, make up the capsule that keeps all the bones together. Over there, the same thing, but now you're looking at the ankle joint. And it's a lot more intricate in the foot and the ankle rather than the hip and the knee. A lot of more smaller bones fixed together. The need for more stability coming from ligaments and the muscles as well. Okay, so briefly let's talk about some of the muscles of the lower extremities. Starting off in the hips, you get the glutes. As you can see right here, and here these little guys in the back. You have the iliopsoas, which are the hip flexors.
Yeah.
Common issue for fighters.
Yeah.
The hamstrings come down the back of the leg, attaching to the back of the tibia over here. You have your quads, which you guys should be pretty knowledgeable about. So they come down off the hip and attach to the front of the tibia down here. And the piriformis is a small muscle, which you can see it, but it's deep to the glute max, which is right here. And it's one of the primary stabilizers and external rotators of it. So then again, down at the knee, you have some overlap because you have the hamstrings and the quads that attach to, or they cross over both the hip joint and the knee joint. And then the gastrocnemius, which you guys know as the calf, right down here, attached to the top of the heel, and then up behind, above the knee joint itself. So that also is a joint muscle. Then down the ankle, triceps surae, which the gastroc is a part of. There's three muscles. They make up the Achilles tendon. Three muscles come down, break down. There's the gastrocnemius, the soleus, which is a smaller one, or a bigger muscle, but underneath the gastroc, and then the posterior tibialis. So basically, those three structures create the Achilles tendon and are responsible for this motion of the foot pushing down. And then you have the peroneals, which make up the side of the lower leg, right in this area. These are important structures for the ankle, stabilizing that joint because they cross over only the ankle. So a lot of time, in general population, you have people that roll the ankle a lot, right?
That happens a lot.
So the peroneals are a muscle that you would strengthen in order to stabilize the outside of the ankle to prevent those injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And then the anterior tibialis is the muscle responsible for lifting the foot up like this. So when you're driving using a lock, it runs down the front of the tibia right here and attaches inside, right in the foot. Okay. All right, so I found this really interesting research article discussing or analyzing the type of injuries in Taekwondo athletes. So data was collected by a survey questionnaire from 512 Taekwondo athletes that have visited a medical institute, like a hospital or a, just somewhere to get checked out for injuries, like a city MD, stuff like that. 3 or more times due to injuries that resulted from Taekwondo activities. They classify the subjects by age, gender, and then the experience in Taekwondo. So it was less than a year, 1 to 3 years, and then over 3 years, which I thought, wasn't very accurate or very specific because, well, I'll get to that, but a lot of time injuries can occur over time, right? Like chronic injuries. So then once all the questionnaires were collected, the analyzation of the data was done. The data was used to then determine the most frequent locations of injuries, so what body part, and the most frequent types of injuries, the diagnoses. Okay, so this is what they came up with. Out of the 512 people, 93 of them suffered injuries to the foot at one time. 86 of them suffered injuries to the knee. 80 were in the ankle, 64 in the thigh, 61 in the head, 48 in the leg, 31 in the toes, and then go to the hip. Which you have issues with. Only 7 had issues in their hips. And then the very last, the least frequent, was the forearm. Just 4 out of 512 people. This is basically just talking about what I just did. So of the top 10 most frequent injury locations, 6 of them were in the lower extremities. And lower extremity injuries in this study accounted for 70% of all the injuries that actually were suffered by these athletes. So therefore, it's more common for a Taekwondo athlete to injure his or her lower extremity than any other part of the body, other than the torso or the arms, or the head. Okay, so these are the most frequent types of injuries. So we talked about the locations, but what types of injuries were they suffering? Contusions, which are bruises. Obviously you kick something hard, you punch something hard, you're gonna get hit by something hard. You're gonna have bruises all over your body. So that can be in the bone, the muscle, anywhere essentially. You received that blow and there was damage to some tissue. Strains, which are an injury to the muscle, either a tear. Tear is the highest type of strain. There's 4 grades. Grade 4 is a tear of the muscle, and then grade 1 through 3 is just a lesser level of the strain. Sprains are talking about ligaments. So the ligaments I was showing you before in the ankle, the knee, and the hip. Anytime you have you suffer an injury where that ligament was elongated further than it likes to be, it's considered a sprain. So anytime with ligaments, the issues with ligaments is that when they're stretched, they can't return to their natural form. So ever. Okay. So say you ever overstretch a rubber band? Yeah. You stretch too far and it never goes back? Yeah. Same idea with the ligaments. So when I was talking about the ankles before, if you were to have weak peroneal muscles, right, and you're constantly rolling your ankle, those ligaments in the ankle over time just keep getting longer and longer and longer, and eventually they just don't do their job anymore. They don't keep the ankle stable. So that's what a sprain is. And fracture, obviously, is what it sounds. Concussion, joint dysfunction is basically just anytime a joint in your body isn't moving or functioning the way it should be. Joint dysfunction. So, for instance, when you have the segments of the vertebra not moving correctly, you know about those. It causes pain. Joint dysfunction. That's how we categorize that. Laceration is a cut, and then dislocation is any time the joint or a bone in the joint actually comes out. Right. Same thing with the shoulder. Most of the time. Okay, so which of these injuries can you effectively work to prevent with proper resistance and mobility training? Can you take a guess?
Concussions. This is Dr. Ray.
In essence, sure, but I'm talking more for just lifting weights, from doing mobility exercises, stretching, stuff like that.
I'd say everything except for concussions, contusions, and laceration.
So, strains, sprains, joint dysfunction.
Really?
and dislocations.
So the so fractures you can't touch.
Well, so when it comes to fractures, I was actually going to lead into this. The way you guys train with the constant hitting and the impact, that's going to help build the strength of the bone, right?
Yeah.
Granted, you have the proper calcium and everything in your body.
Yeah.
But in general, if someone is to come over and try to break your leg in an arm bar, or your arm in an arm bar, no training in the world is gonna help prevent that, right?
Don't stop.
Okay. So now, going back here, talking about you guys, imbalances that are commonly seen in the competitive Taekwondo fighter, and this is based on some references that I was looking at, but also my own experiences and just common sense and just kinesiology and anatomy and all that kind of fun stuff. So you have the kicking leg and the stance leg. In competitive fighting, you predominantly use one, right? You're the one that you kick harder and faster with. You're going to use all the time when you're fighting in a competition.
Yeah.
So this leg, you're going to see hypermobility, so extra motion throughout that hip. So I'll say my right side was my kicking leg. You're going to have more motion in that right hip compared to the stance leg.
Yep. I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that.
So with the more mobility you have, you sacrifice stability.
Yeah.
So therefore, you're going to have less stabilizing strength in that kicking leg, and also what we call static stability, which is that ligaments. The ligaments and dynamic is muscle. So the ligaments, the more motion you get, the longer those ligaments are going to be, the less they're going to do their job overall without the help of the muscle. You're going to have some hypermobility in the knee as compared to the other leg, mostly an extension. So when you straighten the leg out, because you're constantly throwing those kicks, right?
Yeah.
So it's just going to more extension with every kick you got.
So when you talk about extension, you have to leg out, right? Strap it out.
Yeah. So knee extension is this position.
Yeah. So how do you make that knee stronger so that extension doesn't happen?
I'll get that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll keep questions for later.
Sorry.
You're gonna have tight hip flexors, so as I've shown you before. Because again, you're always in this higher position, whether you're side kicking, front kicking. This hip flexor muscle is gonna be short. Over time, it's just gonna tighten up. You're gonna have tight quads because that quad muscle again connects to the tibia all the way up to the hip. So you're shortening it here, and then when you're throwing kicks, you're shortening there every time, right?
Okay.
You're gonna have weak glute med on that side because most of the time you're gonna be using your momentum to get up to this spot, right?
Mm.
So once you're here, normally you use that glute med, which is this muscle right on the side on the hip, to get up here. But you're gonna be using more so on the left, and then using the momentum to get up there. So that over time, that glute med can get weak. Same thing with the hamstrings, because again, you're always going into that extended position. The hamstrings do the opposite motion, they bend the knee. So if you're constantly throwing your knee into that extended position, that hamstring is going to get pulled, and you're not really using it when you're fighting in that type of setting. The peroneals we were talking about before, they're weak because most of the time you see weakness in the hip up here, you can have weakness on the side of the ankle. It just is something that is seen commonly. They go kind of hand in hand, and they're weak glute max. Because unless you're really using a lot of backwards kicking, which I did not see in that type of realm, you're not going to be using that glute max much for that right side, the kicking side. And then to the stance leg, basically opposite. We want more stability in that leg. There's going to be less motion in that left hip if I was kicking my right. Compared to I wrote stance, I meant to say kicking leg. So you have more strength there, stabilizing strength in that stance leg compared to the kicking leg. Again, another typo. Specifically in the internal and external rotators, so that piriformis I was mentioning before, those little muscles that both rotate, the hip out and in like this.
Yeah.
They're going to be stronger, which is what leads to that the stability. Dynamically, at least. You're gonna have a tight glute med as opposed to the weak one, right? Because you're always going to be in this position.
Mm.
How many times do you just throw thousands of kicks here as long as you can? So now, when I'm in that stance position, that glute med on the left side is going to be shortened this whole time.
Mm.
So, Damien, a lot of time when I stretch out, you have that,
Yeah.
that personal experience.
Yeah, no.
You can have weak adductors, which is the inside of the thigh.
Have a visit.
The adductors are on the inside of the thigh. They do the opposite motion of what the glute med does. So the glute med does this, the adductors, the opposite motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now on my stance leg, I'm gonna be high up into abduction on this leg, right here. So these are just gonna be getting pulled on all the time. And then again, weak hamstrings, because you really aren't using them unless you pick in here, which you don't do much or at all. Okay, so now here's some areas of focus for the competitive athlete in Taekwondo. Most importantly, train both sides. We're going to train both legs the same.
Oh, say that for you again. That's very, very important.
Very important. Train both legs the same you would normally with your stronger leg. So muscle balances in general increase your susceptibility to injury. Anytime you have stronger muscles on one side of the body, just imbalances in general can lead to injury. And then implementing some kicking training with your non-dominant side, or those same sequence your regimen, to decrease likelihood of injury. And then another important thing I want you to consider and do with your training regimen is implementing unilateral exercises. So unilateral is one-sided. So for instance, if we're talking squats. Squats typically are two-legged, that would be called bilateral.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you have a bilateral exercise, your stronger side is going to take over. So if I have a weak left leg, and I'm squatting all day, my right one's going to take over for it. So if you implement unilateral exercises into your training, there's no really, you're going to have more progress in strengthening that weaker side.
Mm-hmm.
And then train your hamstrings eccentrically. Damon, you were telling me earlier on that you have seen a lot of hamstring pulls.
Yeah.
Which is a level of a strain anytime you have a pull. A good way to target that and to prevent hamstring pulls are training them eccentrically, right? So there are 3 different contractions of muscle tissue. You have concentric, which is what you think of normally. It's just shortening on that muscle. So concentric contraction of your hamstring is shortening it, right? You have isometric, which is with no change in length. So I could actively isometrically contract my hamstring without it moving. So the muscle contracts, but the leg doesn't move.
Okay.
Then you have the opposite of concentric is eccentric. It's the contraction of the muscle tissue as it elongates. Right?
Okay.
So if we train what people like to call negatives in the gym,
Okay.
when you weight, you put a high load, say in the biceps, you hold it and you like to slowly lower it as slow as you can.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we call eccentric training or eccentric contraction. So when you think about it, every time you kick, your hamstring is working in that eccentric fashion. When it's too weak and your quad is stronger, you can throw a strong kick and it's gonna pull that hamstring tissue, right? Instead of, if you had the strength there to slowly, it wouldn't be slow, it would be quick.
Mm.
But the elongation, I'm saying,
Yeah.
of that muscle, if the strength is there, there's less likelihood for a strain.
Mm.
Similar to when we were talking with your shoulder, throwing the punches, remember?
Yeah.
That strength of that one muscle was weak into elongation. And then we're going to talk about stretching out your quads and your hip flexors, which Abby, you've seen that is very important so far.
Yeah.
So those are 2 muscles that get very tight when you're throwing a lot of kicks. Kick. You want to stretch them out. Otherwise, the tightness here can cause your legs to function differently. And then also you should look into training hip rotator and glute med strength. Glute med is that muscle I was talking about before. And hip rotator, so this motion here, that will increase the stability in that hip joint. More specifically, it's more useful for that kicking leg because we're going to be weaker with the stabilizing muscles on that side. So I said these two body. Okay. Now you want to increase also hip and spine mobility in general, because once you're lacking in one area, the other area is going to try to take over. So if your hip doesn't move and you want to bend down, your hip doesn't want to move as much, immediately your lower back is going to try to take over.
Yeah.
And that in itself is not going to cause, well, it could cause injuries, but it can also cause back injuries. We're not talking about that specifically right now, but they go hand in hand, essentially. And train those peroneals, those muscles that pull that ankle out to the side that I was telling you about, to prevent those, the rolling of the ankle, any of those sprains that are common in this sport. And lastly, there's always a reason for you experiencing pain. It's not normal to be in pain, ever. I know fighters in general like to say, even weightlifters, I'm hurting, but it's normal because it's what I do. There's always a reason why you're in pain. And mechanical injuries are always caused by an imbalance somewhere along the chain. So whether you have tightness and weakness here, somewhere there's an imbalance, and that's what's most likely contributing to the pain here. And never stop training for injury prevention. As long as you put in the necessary work to rid yourself of muscle imbalances, joint dysfunction, you will be limiting the potential of preventable injury. So as long as you're going to be fighting, you're going to need to be putting this kind of stuff in, this kind of work in, because the nature of this sport is violence, and it puts a lot of stress on your body. So you need to make sure you have the motion and the strength within that range to make sure you prevent injuries from now until the day you stop. And again, injury prevention is a lifelong endeavor. Again, just always going to want to prevent injury.
Yeah.
As long as you put the work in to keep everything strong, keep everything mobile, you can put yourself in the best position to prevent injury. So thank you for listening. That was my presentation. Do you have any questions before we wait for a game?
So with the ankle tendons, when I sit, my ankles always flop inward.
You sit in what position?
If I just sit down, they flop inward.
So
How can I that's permanent, I assume, because I can't.
So that's just showing that you in general have a lot of mobility everywhere.
Yeah.
But specifically, you have more mobility into that motion, which means the ligaments are not tight on the outside. Exactly what I was talking about. So what you would want to do is strengthen those areas. So you do exercises like the fire hydrant,
The band, yeah.
the band. Anything that challenges the muscle integrity on the outside of the lower leg. But you also don't want to just work on those. You want to work on the ones that on the inside as well. So just stabilizing exercises like balancing, using the band to go both ways. Those are very good and basic ways to train those muscles. Any other questions? Steve?
There's some examples of hip strengthening, stretching that you would describe.
Oh, okay, so that's a good question. So we were talking about the stretching of the quad and the hip flexor. Very simple exercise. You guys see it here? Yeah. We hold on to something to balance, keep your balance. Grabbing your ankle right above the foot. You pull to bend the knee, that would be stretching the quad. And then if you squeeze your glute muscle back here, at the same time, you should feel a stretch all the way up into the top of the hip. And that is a good stretch for the quad. And a similar exercise, but more specific to the hip flexor, you can come down here like this, down on one knee, keeping the knee right below your hip, starting position. Then you do the same thing. You're gonna squeeze your glute muscle back here, and you can even squeeze, tighten up your core, and a little shift your weight forward, and it'll feel a pull in the front of the hip right there. That is two good stretches for the hips. Two good stretches for the hips, hip flexors and the quad. And then talking about that eccentric hamstring strength we were discussing before. Something easy, simple. You can grab some kind of ankle weight, something to weigh the ankle down.
Yeah.
And just focus on bringing that slowly down, right? You can even, if you have a strap, something to pull it up to help you to come up. The more important to focus on is coming down. So the strength elongates the muscle. something like that. You could even get, that ball exercise that we were doing with the bridge. Remember that one? It's like a bridge you push with your heels down to the ball, bring it in and going out. It's the out part that would be more important there. There's a lot of simple ways to strengthen, any muscle that you choose. Any Google search will also be quick and easy to get. Just type in exactly what you're looking for. I want to strengthen my hamstrings eccentrically. Hamstring eccentric exercise. Boom, you can have a million exercises.
Maybe from an RDL.
Huh?
RDL.
RDL is a good one too. RDL is a Romanian deadlift. So it's your typical deadlift. What you would normally do is bending at the knee, right? Coming up. In RDL, you can do either with two legs or more importantly with one leg we were talking about before. You have one knee down. You're gonna have a slight bend in that knee. You're gonna come down, keeping your core nice and tight. All the motion is gonna come from the hip, right? So you're coming down. You can use a weight if you'd like, but most likely just doing without is good. And again, nice and slow, elongating that muscle, and come back up. Nice and easy. Remember, it's important to keep the slight bend in the knee and all the motion to come from the hip rather than from the spine. I know Damien had a lot of questions.
Oh, I have one. So, you have a very tight upper back, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
How do I stretch that?
How do you stretch what part? Like the mid back? You're showing me
Yes.
right in this area?
Yeah, from here up, I have no idea how to stretch that.
Well, so again, coming back to that ball exercise we had before,
Okay.
those big balls, plyo ball you can call them. You can set one up on the floor, scoot your butt. I don't know if I have any. You don't have any.
Hold on.
You have a big ball?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so you can put the ball up against the wall like this. What you do is scoot your butt as far back as you can. It's good when you're not on a slippery surface. Put your hands up on the knees here. You're gonna lean back as far as you can, and you can use your hands to push back even a little further. What you want to do is get to that point of you feel that stiffness or that tightness, and right when you get there, you push a little bit more, and then you come back. And it's a repetition over and over as time goes on. You'll gain range, with each rep. Just a little bit of range at a time, and that's something you're gonna have to maintain because stretching that out one time isn't gonna.
So you stop doing it and stop looking.
Right. So that's a great exercise for if you're susceptible to getting tight in the mid back. It's a great exercise to implement to your regimen. A couple times a week, even daily, if you need it. Anything else?
I'm good for now.
Yeah, do you want to see if Damien's busy?
I'll do it.
So, okay, lots of questions. So, like you said before, like the most common injury, this ankle twisting thing, is very, very high. But knees giving out is also high, hamstring giving out is also high. We do the spin back kick. There's a lot of spin back kicks, but you never usually have to pull from the intention of like the inside of the groin here. You get a lot of groin pull from the spin back kick. So what are the? So I know there's a lot of smaller muscles because a lot of times when we work out, you do a lot of squats, make the legs stronger, and the hips stronger. But I know there's a lot of smaller muscles that can make our kicks faster, make it stronger, make it more stable.
More stable, yep.
So what are the things that we can do to focus more on those? So a lot of times again, everyone focuses on just kick row. So how do we work those smaller muscles? What can we do to do that?
So any rotational aspect for the hip in general, with added resistance, will strengthen those stabilizing structures that we're talking about, rotational motion, which is something that is typical.
Yeah.
So if you have a resistance band, so you can tie it around your ankle and then up to like a wall or something else.
Yeah.
And then hold on for balance, right?
Yeah.
So say I have a resistance band pulling me that way, right? This motion into this rotation. Is it not showing it?
Yeah.
Right. So if a band is pulling me here, I pull the band out that way, right?
Okay.
That is one exercise for internal rotation of the hip. And then you could switch it around, have the band pull you that way, right? So it's pulling me towards my right. And then I use the muscles to turn this way, which we call external rotation.
Yeah.
Where the hip is rotating outwards.
So what? So as how do we know that? Like, so you guys know this we do, but like we'll do the drills and say, okay, I guess we're fine.
Well,
what are we looking for? What specific spot are we looking for?
So with those two exercises, you feel a burning, like a muscle fatigue feeling,
Okay.
deep back and
Past
deep,
the, past the muscle.
deeper to like the big glute muscle that you can do.
Okay. So now we're looking for things that are so not just the outside burn, but like the inside burn.
Yeah.
Motion drill.
And there's subtle motions, so you don't want like your whole hip to burn. You don't want the quads, any big muscles really. With those exercises, it's gonna be small muscles, so they're gonna be more difficult. You're not gonna have the strength there. You're gonna have the deep burning, deep muscle burn. You know what I'm saying?
Also, for those out there that are overachievers, how you doing, guys? You really want to make sure not to do too much. Right. So don't
Weight wise.
Weight wise.
Because
Don't pick the 30-pound weight on the leg.
Right, because they're very small muscles. So obviously,
Yeah.
the smaller the muscle, the weaker that they are.
Okay.
If a muscle is this big, like the rotators in the hip, this big by this wide.
Yeah.
Right. That's a lot smaller than the quad, which is this huge mass of tissue.
Yeah.
So obviously, it's not going to be able to move as much weight. So you're not going to be able to move 200 pounds like you might be able to squat 200 pounds.
But someone's going to try.
Like if you try,
That's a bad idea, right?
you're going to start to feel other muscles working.
Okay.
So once you feel the bigger muscles kind of take over, that's when you know you're doing too much weight, because the smaller muscle is now not capable to move the weight on its own.
Mm.
So the other bigger muscles are trying to help out.
So all these small muscles, what would be like the max range of weight? Are we talking about like 4 pounds, 5 pounds, opposed to like 8 and 10 pounds?
It's really subjective. It's whatever.
But it shouldn't be more than like 20-pound weight. Don't do that.
Initially, absolutely not. No.
Gotcha.
But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you can't get to that part. I can't get to 20 pounds.
But that's muscle.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, any muscle can grow. Any muscle can get stronger. And the more you focus on training a particular muscle, the stronger it'll get. So I can't really put a cap on it. But you're not going to be moving, 100, 200 pounds into that range. It's just
So having that extra stability, having that strength, what would it do for the body, like in terms of your ability? Because if I have all these smaller muscles that much stronger, I'm just super stable now, and everything should work pretty much fine. Or no?
So the stronger you are, the more stability that you have. Think of it as a house.
Yeah.
You have this big house on this crappy little foundation, right? You want to build a strong foundation so that the rest of the house can be built, right?
Yeah.
Same aspect here. You want to have a strong foundation with the stability of the joint, and then so that you can train harder, you can create more force. So if I don't have a lot of stability here, so think about if you're going up the stairs, right? If my legs were unstable and I was going up the stairs, I wouldn't be great at that particular task, right? Because I'm struggling. So the stronger I am here, if I'm strong and stable in this range here, I can now focus on those bigger muscles that I want to target to strengthen. And the stronger you get, the more power you can produce. And that's kind of the goal of Taekwondo, right? You want to be able to be fast, you want to be powerful. So you need to have first a strong, stable foundation to build off.
Okay. Ankles, because of those. What about like knees and hips? Because knees are a funny place. Like a lot of times you feel tightness in your knees, like you think your knees are tight. Like, oh, it's my hamstrings. Your hamstrings out, your quads out. But should you be stretching your knees? Like, is that a thing? Because a lot of times you see this kind of stuff. Ooh, okay. So you feel like this kind of stuff here, pulling this like this.
Yeah, what you're doing there is not stretching the knee, it's stretching the hip.
Aha!
So what we call the chain, right? So the chain's all connected, the hip, knee, and the ankle.
Yeah.
If I have weakness in my hip, right, particularly on the outside, my knee is going to forward. So you see how that's not a good thing to have?
Yeah.
This knee caving right here, that's what you were referring to before.
Yeah.
So if I strengthen out here, I'll be able to bring it out into it, and then it'll be better aligned to function, right? So the knee in particular is gonna be where you notice issues that are really caused by the hip and the ankle. So the hip and the ankle are basically, you can think of them as one.
Gotcha.
If I have weakness here, I'm gonna have weakness on the outside of my ankle, and vice versa.
So,
But you're gonna notice it in the knee.
so the knee shouldn't be touched. It's more or less like it's going to do its job by itself. There's nothing. I don't need to stretch it out or try to stretch it out.
You're not gonna stretch it out this way and this way because the knee really only moves in one range. It's moving forward and back.
Yeah.
Dominant, right? So you're gonna stretch here, which is a quad stretch. That's stretching the knee because it crosses the knee. You're gonna stretch your hamstrings. That's crossing the knee. That's stretching the knee, right? But it's only in these motions, forward and back for the knee.
But the main focus should be on the quads and the hamstrings going around it as opposed to it.
Right. You want to be mobile and stable around that knee joint. And a lot of time you're gonna have to look both up and down.
Is the strength? Is the ability? Is there an ability? Is there a thing to strengthen the knees at all, or no?
Oh, quad strengthening and hamstring strengthening.
But the
joint itself?
Yeah. No. So
No, you
this,
can't.
This is the thing that works.
Yeah.
Right? These are my people.
Right. Bones
Okay.
and ligaments cannot be strengthened. You want to strengthen the muscles around those joints. Because essentially, your first line of defense is going to be muscles. If the muscles are strong enough, you're not going to have any issues with the joint. If the muscles give out, then you're relying on the ligaments and the bones to be intact. And if those are not weak enough or not strong enough to withhold any blow and take it, that's when you're going to see those tissues fail. Fractures, tears in the ligaments, stuff like that. So your muscles are your first line of defense. Always want those to be as strong as possible, always, no matter what.
Okay. You spoke before about working on both sides of the body. So currently, the metaphors for Taekwondo is a lot of the front foot stuff and all the different variations of the front foot roundhouse kick.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I believe that doesn't seem healthy a lot of the time because there isn't that with one-to-one transition from one side to the other. They're putting a lot of strain on these legs. We're talking about like upwards of 10,000 kicks, maybe from daily to maybe weeks.
necessarily
Yeah.
important to train both legs.
Now, what is the downside of just living here?
Everything essentially that I've been talking about, referring to muscle balances, stuff like that. If you're super tight and strong in the front, everything in the back is weak, or one side is mobile and the other side's not mobile but stable.
Yeah.
That's what we could refer to as imbalances in the body.
So like that hamstring pulling out.
Right. Something like that. So anytime you have imbalances, you're just leading yourself to be susceptible to injury. Because not always in life are you going to be kicking. Right? Sometimes maybe you're crossing the street and you don't see a car coming, and then the last second you jump back. If this mobile hip, which is normally mobile and it's good for kicking, is not stable, and you jump back and land on it, if it's not stable enough to hold you up, you could suffer injury. So it's like things like that, where they translate to not only here, but in real life and stuff beyond the gym. When you get older, eventually you have to stop fighting, but you need to be stable and equal.
Because of
Just for life, anything with life goes at you.
Gotcha.
That's good stress.
Yeah.
Oh, and then we could talk about that too. So repetitive stress, for one, is common in runners. Repetitive stress is anytime you're constantly doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, kicking, right?
Yeah.
Runners are constantly landing boom, 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 what we call a repetitive stress injury, or we can call stress, or an example of that would be a stress fracture.
Yeah.
If you are constantly just running every day, 20 miles, even not even that. It could be in the beginning of your training, but you're doing stuff repetitive and you never let the body to heal. You can run into injuries that we call stress fractures, which is essentially you don't see the fracture in the bone, but with each impact it's taking, there are little microscopic fractures that are weakening over time. You understand what I'm saying? So if you picture in the windshield, there's a crack in the windshield, and then it keeps growing over time. Same idea with the stress fracture, and then eventually it shatters. Eventually, you can have a shatter.
Oh, that's fun.
In the stress fracture. So if you're punching over and over, you don't give yourself enough time to heal. Your wrist could get the tibia down here when you're running. Any tissue that is prone or put under continual stress, repetitive stress, the exact same stress for long periods of time, you're making it more susceptible to repetitive stress injuries.
So another major one for me is growing ball. How? What can be done to strengthen that? So you talked about before about the hips.
You want to have the range, so you want these muscles to be loose.
Yeah.
And but you also want the strength there.
Is flexibility a sign of that? Like if someone is too flexible, that's how say they're growing, or no, you're just the same one thing as everybody else.
So it could. So you're saying, would you want to be as mobile as possible?
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you're also strong within each range you're at. So with all the ranges you have access to. So if my hip can only move from here to here, for instance, I want to be as strong as I physically can in that range, right? But if I can stretch and do mobility stuff and get my leg to move here, but I don't strengthen from here to here, now in this new range, I'm weak, right? So you want to have strength in the range that you have, and that will protect the joint.
And that strength is there from the small muscles versus having bigger ones.
It's from all the muscles that cross that joint. Any muscle that's in front of the hip, behind the hip, on the side of the hip, you want to have strength so that it will limit possibility for dislocation, stuff like that.
No, now we've heard a lot about that in running, and now we're going to talk a lot about that Taekwondo as well. So as
The hip flexor, yeah.
Yes. So now, how it's not just here, but it runs through your whole body, yeah.
The hip flexor is a muscle that attaches. The iliopsoas is one you're talking about. Attaches to the spine.
Yeah.
In the front of the spine, and it runs and attaches right in the top of the femur, right there.
So how?
So you talk about the nerve.
Yes. Yeah.
The sciatic nerve.
Yes.
So that runs out here, comes out the back, goes all the way down the leg to the bottom of the foot. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How do you should that be a real focus in terms of warming up and stretching? Is that a primary thing? Because people really try to stretch that all the time. Should you stretch it all the time?
The nerve or the hamstrings you're talking about?
Well, we always do the hamstring. We do our splits and our dips and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's a given. It's not about the psoas muscle itself. Like the
sciatic nerve.
Yes, like sciatic nerve, the nerve glide, that kind of stuff.
No.
That's something that should be done regularly, routinely.
No, that the sciatic nerve really only becomes an issue when it's bound down, and that will be caused by an injury, most likely to the back, which isn't really what we're talking about here.
Okay.
I'm going to continue. So sciatic nerve, you're saying you want to stretch.
Should that be a thing? Because a lot of times you have these complaints about like lower back pain and stuff like that, and we assume that we just kicked so much and it hurt something like down here and it's pulling on our back, but really it could be that. And
I don't want you guys to try to diagnose yourselves.
No.
That could lead to other issues. You're gonna get enough stretching of that nerve just from stretching your hamstring.
Okay.
So anytime your leg is straight and you're stretching the hamstring, then sciatic nerve is stretch.
That's the difference between the hamstring stretch and
Okay.
if they feel sciatic nerve tension, what that difference?
Sure. So you have hamstrings, whether you have restriction in the hamstring muscle, tightness in the muscle, or in order to decide between that and tightness in the nerve.
Yeah.
If you're to stretch your hamstring, the way to stretch your hamstring is just pulling over the two joints that it crosses. So the hamstring crosses the hip joint and it crosses the knee. So in order to lengthen the hamstring at the hip joint, you need to have flexion there, right? In order to lengthen it over the knee joint, you need to extend the knee. There is no, the hamstring does not affect the ankle. So now in order to decipher between the two, if you're to stretch your hamstring like you normally would, right? This is this hamstring stretch. Right now I'm stretching my hamstring because I'm flexing at the hip, right? And I'm straight at the knee, extending the knee. If you want to decide between hamstring tightness or sciatic nerve tightness is including the ankle. You pull the ankle up here, and the stretch feeling that you're having intensifies, that's sciatic nerve. If I move this ankle and nothing changes with the stretch I'm feeling, that's hamstring.
So if I pull people over here and I grab this here, so now I'm pulling this and I feel my stretch. But if I let it go, I feel a stretch, I don't feel the same intense stretch.
So the intensity increases when you pull the ankle.
Yeah.
That would be sciatic nerve tension
That's how
rather than tight hamstrings.
Okay, so that's how you know which one you should be focusing on, opposed to just like that for a moment. She's younger and made it, you know, just liquid. So she comes down and she would grab her leg here and so this is regular stretch. Do you feel anything?
No.
So that's that. Exactly my point. So she'd be doing a hamstring stretch as opposed to I would be doing a sciatic nerve stretch, and I would know that just based on me grabbing my
The
foot.
ankle motion intensifies the stretch. That's nerve and not muscle.
So she has no problem with her sciatic nerve in a sense because she can grab this and not feel anything.
Right. But again, that's not important. The overall aspect is just the mobility and stability.
Okay.
Once you get into like trying to diagnose yourself, you kind of go into a dark hole that you will never come out of.
For safety purposes, maybe mention that they shouldn't hold it for long.
Yeah, that's important too. Going back to that stretch, so for you, now you figured out that it's not your hamstring that's tight, it's your sciatic nerve.
Yeah.
How do you stretch it? You won't want to stretch it like you would normally stretch a muscle where you hold it for a long period of time. Because when it comes to nerve, prolonged stretching of the nerve will cause damage. So you would more want to go back into that position you already had for the sciatic nerve stretch. You want to just come here, get to that spot, and now you want to pull the ankle and then release it and put slack back on the nerve.
Okay.
So you want to pull and then slack. It's very similar to what I do to you in the front.
Yeah. So you do this. Is there a certain number of times or is it a certain
Just
amount?
when you feel it's loosening up. I wouldn't go crazy. I'd probably stick to just a couple of sets initially, because the nerve doesn't like to be stretched.
Okay.
So in order to avoid injury, don't overdo it,
Yeah.
and don't hold that stretch when it comes to the nerve.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Focus is very important.
No.
Which shows how they can strengthen the glute med naturally. That appears to be really that
Okay. So glute med strengthening exercises anytime you're moving the leg into this position, right? I'm moving away from your body. So in order to strengthen the glute med, you can lay on your side like so, and you'll be strengthening the top one, right? So in this position, you want to bring the hip up and back down, just like that, using this muscle right here.
Yeah.
You want a straight line from your shoulder to your ankle. If it's up in front of you like this,
Yeah.
you're not using the glute med, you're using different ones. So that's wrong. But you want a straight line from the shoulder to the ankle. You love this exercise.
Oh, it's still.
Go up and down. That would be a concentric way to strengthen that glute. Isometric, which is more for normal people. When you're walking, that's how that muscle fires. It doesn't fire by shortening. It just fires at the length that it's at. Isometric, I explained that to you guys before.
Yeah.
A good exercise for that would be those fire agents that we showed you.
Yeah.
Remember those? So you can implement that into your training regimen and show your students those. When it comes to the glute max, which is the muscle that you think of when you think of the glutes. You could just quickly and easy make it easy, right? You instead of being on your side, you go on your stomach, and you can either keep your knee straight here and lift it this way, or you can take the hamstring out of the equation and purely have the glute max, keep the knee bent, and lift up.
Okay.
So straighten this up is no wallet.
Yeah.
If I'm here, you can watch the contraction, it's not as much. I feel more in the hamstring. But once I take the hamstring out of it by shortening it and lift it up, I feel full muscle contraction.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
That's very, it's a very simple way to do it.
That's great. Gotcha.
All right?
Okay. Oh my God. Well, again, John, thank you very much.
Glad to be of help.
Yes, yes. Thank you very, very,
Very
very
well.
awesome. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed the show. All the bruises, all the scars. There we go.